I'm Peter Shrope, and in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to take you through the process that I use for coiling and throwing a large pot on the potter's wheel. I start out using my homemade extruder, and I extrude long 30-inch lengths of clay, which I store under plastic. I next slap out a slab, which I'm going to use for the base. Then I throw a ring on the potter's wheel, because my wheel doesn't have bat pins. And I use that ring to attach a wooden bat by pounding it onto the surface and using suction to hold it in place. I take my slab, I throw it out, flatten it down, trim it with my pin tool, and prepare the base for the first ribbon of clay. And so when I build up the pot in this manner, I'm using traditional hand building techniques. I'm scoring, adding water or slip. I also add a reinforcement coil to the inside of the joint, which I throw not only up, but I also throw down so that inside joint is sealed. As I'm throwing it up, I use 2 wooden ribs, one on the inside, one on the outside, to smooth it down. I trim the excess off at the top with my pin tool, and I build up successive layers. One thing you're not seeing here is that I use my wire tool and cut the bottom of the pot at least twice a day, and then I take my finger right down along the bottom seam and seal that so it keeps the pot in place. If you don't cut it periodically and keep it somewhat free from the bottom, at the end the pot will be too big and heavy, and your bottom will be too hard that it will just slice right through, and you'll end up with no bottom on your piece. So you can see how I'm taking these ribbons, I'm pinching them together, I'm adding a coil on the inside and squeezing that in place. And then I sit down and I throw it down, as you can see, but also up. So this is a 3-day process, only because you can't add too many layers at once without having it dry and stiffen up a little bit. So you have to constantly keep your eye on it and mist it sometimes towards the bottom layers to keep it damp, not wet, not leather hard, but slightly damp so it holds its shape. And the top wants to be wetter so you can continue to work with it. There's a good shot of using my ribs, using a pin tool, back to adding more layers. So a rule of thumb that I use is a little bit of geometry, and that is the circumference equals pi d. So right now this pot is about 15 or 16 inches in diameter, and so the length of clay that I need is going to be pi times d, which is 3.14 times the diameter. So if I'm in the 16-inch in diameter range, I'm going to need lengths of coils or ribbons that are in the neighborhood of 48 inches long. And here you can see by the sun in the back, it's the end of the day. I'm putting on a last layer, and the pot has sit overnight, and I'm back at it the next morning. So getting back to the circumference, that length that you need becomes important, because it's going to determine how many coils you need to extrude, how many ribbons you need to extrude, and then when you're adding pieces, you're going to want to have a tape measure handy, which is not something you might normally keep next to your potter's wheel, but in this case, a tape measure is handy so that you can measure that length. And because it ends up being so long, you want to slow everything down. You want to slow the speed of your wheel down. You want to slow the speed that your fingers move up the side of the clay, because if you think about 48 inches in length of wet coil, once you put your fingers on it to throw it in place, it takes a second or two for it, or close to 3 maybe, to make one full revolution when you're throwing slowly. And since you can't collar these large pots, you have to kind of pre-plan your shape out beforehand. And you can see that now I'm starting to bring this back in, and I'm starting to define a little bit of a shoulder. And you need to think about that kind of from the beginning. So when I do get finished with these, and they do get cut off the bat, I let them dry for at least a week on several layers of newspaper, so when the bottom shrinks, it won't stick to anything and crack. And then I have made these shapes so they fit in the electric kiln that I have. And after a week or more, I put them in the kiln, I crack the lid, I bring it up to about 150 degrees and hold it there for a couple hours, turn it off, close the lid, come back the next day. All of the moisture at that point has been driven out, and then I bring it up to about 300 degrees and hold it for a couple hours, and that's going to help any air pockets. It's going to help any of that expanding air migrate out through the clay body. And I do that for the second day, turn the kiln off, and then on the third day I start a normal bisque firing at a slow speed and take about 12 or 14 hours to bring it up to bisque temperature. So I'm wrapping this thing up now, putting the final touches on it. And I'd like to thank you for watching, and good luck if you try it yourself.